Well, you're raising the dead, or shooting for the stars. Well, you can't go wrong with a Pottymouth guitar.
All right, welcome back to Pottymouth Guitars. You're looking at Earl Pottymouth Arbuckle. So, we're going to do some more guitaring. And we're back with this familiar beast, this gorgeous, gorgeous animal. I'm having a great time doing for the lovely and talented Stacy Shea Williams. Can't wait to deliver this to her. But right now, we need to get the clear coat right on the sides. So we've got the back and the front. The front is what I'm messing with right now. I'm distracted because I'm a very distractible boy. Yeah, I'm one of those ADD kids. And I didn't have the ADH part, the hyperactive thing. I was this sort of laconic, or what do you call it? Laconic, no. Phlegmatic, is that the? I can't remember which humor it is. But I was just sort of happy, quiet, very disruptive, but always in a very quiet way. And I didn't walk around or display any of the things that get you recommended as a hyperactive kid. So I was never treated as a hyperactive kid. And I didn't get diagnosed with ADD until I was 31 years old, 32, something like that. Anyway, a little late in life. I digress. As I said, I'm a distractible boy. So anyway, so pleased with the top. We've already talked about that. We've looked at it. And here's a reveal of the back. It is looking gorgeous. Did I show you the back? I don't know if I... Did we take... I don't know if I had a video for when I undid the back. If there isn't, then you're getting a little peek at what the first stage of the clear coat of this back is, and it looks great. If you look at the surface, you can see all these little tiny bubbles. We're all over the surface, but that's fine. We poured a nice thick coat. There's going to be plenty of material to remove, and we're going to remove all those little bubbles and whatnot along with them. And I do see little flecks of glitter all the way through, which kind of makes me happy, actually. That glitter's just not going to... It does not wish to be refused. So, but when we covered the top, I tried to cover the entire side because as we poured the top, we didn't put a gate or a fence of tape around the perimeter like I did on the back. I'd lined the entire side with tape so that it would capture that epoxy and hold it, because I didn't want it pooling on the front of the guitar. We did have a little bit had some epoxy come through this hole, and there's a blob on the top, but we'll take care of that when we sand it down. But I didn't want, a whole array of blobs of that to take care of on the sides. But because the back is the back and it's a little less problematic, and we also have more material to deal with on the back. I want to sand as little as possible on the front because we didn't fence it off. We didn't end up with as thick of a pour of epoxy, which is great. Less to remove, and also resulting in much fewer bubbly stuff, all that kind of problem. But as the epoxy kind of poured over the edges, I tried to smear it around and cover all of this glitter sides, and I did most of it. I got most of it pretty decent, but there are some parts that were not covered with the epoxy. So I've got me a Siggy's yogurt container. If you like Icelandic yogurt, I ate a whole lot of Siggy's, and now I've gotten on this other brand called Icelandic Provisions. And I don't know, those Icelandic folks, they really make some fantastic yogurt. It's kind of like Greek yogurt, but even creamier. Oh boy, it's a little late, but I had a nap. So we're going to pour equal portions of the two epoxy ingredients. Let's make sure that we're getting a full... This worked better with the kitchen with water. Okay, I can kind of see from the inside. All right, we'll use that. It's a little nerve-wracking pouring it on top of the guitar, though. I do not recommend this, but for whatever reason, the lighting is making it impossible to see the level through this kind of translucent cup. It worked last time, but not this time. All right, so we've got the resin in. I get the hardener. Pour an equal portion of the hardener in there. And if you do use epoxy, be very, very conscious. Make sure that you mix equal portions, because if you are off too much either way, too much hardener or too much resin, it ends up drying weird. Sometimes doesn't want to dry. And that's kind of a nightmare situation. Because it's glue. In the end, we're dealing with glue. So you want your glue to dry. Otherwise, it does not attach things together. So we mix this for 3 minutes. I'm going to try and do it as non-aggressively as possible, but because the mixing process naturally creates bubbles in the epoxy, which is a curse. But actually, with this applying it to the sides, we actually shouldn't have the same problems that we have with sort of pooling when we do a pour and creating kind of a pool of the epoxy. That's when the bubbles are especially problematic, because they settle. They sit in there. They're not in this situation. They're going to be gravity's going to be messing with them in a different way, because the epoxy is going to be kind of sliding down the sides of this guitar as it dries, and we're essentially hoping to we're hoping that as much of it stays as possible. I'm noticing, of course, that I forgot to get myself a second yogurt container, which is important for the mixing process. So I will be back shortly. There we go. All right. With this method, with the epoxy, basically they recommend whenever you do an epoxy deal that you start the mix in one container and then transfer what you've been mixing for 3 minutes into another container, and then you mix that one for 3 minutes. And what happens in the transfer basically is the stuff that's going to get poured from one to the other isn't going to have as much of the stuff that clings to the sides. So any of the sort of thicker stuff, which is the hardener, that may cling to the sides and is resisting mixing with the other, any portion that isn't well mixed will be left behind. So here we go. Get as much of it in there. I kind of wondered whether this was sort of an artificial shortcut just to make sure that the stuff got mixed for 6 minutes. To put in an extra step to sort of trick people into doing a more thorough mixing job, but last time I did this method, I came back later and was was going to just remove the layer of epoxy out of the inside of the plastic jar, because I was thinking of trying to reuse that jar. And it was like 2 or 3 days later, if not even more maybe. And sure enough, there was still tacky epoxy in there. So, however long it had been, that epoxy had not dried. And, it was the film inside of a container, so it was thin. It wasn't like there was a big pool of it. And, this stuff was dried hard, and that stuff was still gooey. So, last thing you want is, to apply some epoxy to a guitar or table or something that you're doing a clear coat on, and then still have that surface tacky weeks later. Because even if it does eventually dry, and eventually dry hard, consistent with the other stuff, even if it actually ended up uniform eventually, in the meantime, for 2 weeks, it's going to be, vulnerable to having motes of dust and whatever various, airborne particles introduced into the not quite set adhesive. And, that part, even if it dried as clear as everything else, in the end, technically, it wouldn't be as clear, because even if the epoxy was clear, those 2 weeks of vulnerability would have left it with some motes of dust in it, and it would end up not being clear. All right, so I'm just realizing that I'm about to do some epoxy pouring, and I've got my beard all out. So it takes a little bit for this epoxy to blend, so I'm going to take the couple of minutes I have to braid my beard so that it's easier to keep it out of the way. Because as I have experienced over and over again, is that if I don't do this, I end up dipping my beard in the epoxy. And even if I do this, sometimes I still dip my beard in the epoxy. But at least if it's like this, it's a lot easier to clean. I only have to dish soap the end of my braid instead of what usually ends up being pretty much my beard all the way up to the chin gets adulterated with that stuff if it touches it at all. So I'm going to take my beard, braid it up, and I'm going to button it into my shirt. I'm even going to button my top button here, just to try and ensure that my beard is contained. So this shirt, this swanky shirt, I don't know if you could see the sparkles in it. There's this material called Lurex. It's basically, if you see metallic accents in clothing, it's usually Lurex, because it's very reflective metallic thread. And this was my Uncle Clarence's shirt, and my dad proudly gave it to me because he'd picked up a few of Clarence's shirts when Clarence passed on. And when my dad was nearing the end of his life, and just before he passed on, he wanted to make sure that I had these shirts of his brothers, and a shirt or two that he had stolen from my grandpa, my mom's dad, who he admired greatly. Yeah, he liked my mom's dad a lot. That was a nice thing that they got along well. Anyway, so we're getting about ready to get after this. And I'm glad I noticed that, whatever the heck that was. Okay. I think we're going to be doing a lot of revolving. This lighting situation, it's always kind of complicated. lighting to make sure that you can see everything sometimes makes it difficult for me to see anything. And that's not good. I'm actually thinking I was going to use a palette knife, like an artist's palette knife, which is what I was using originally to get this stuff on here. But I think I'm just going to use this knife. Spread it like butter. Yeah, I think that's going to work just fine. Yeah, I'll be darned. It's kind of easy to manipulate this one, actually. Okay, I'm glad we got the little safeguard lid deal going on here, because this stuff is already sliding off. And I'm expecting to find a few dollops of it on the bottom, but we'll be able to take care of that with sandpaper and whatnot. Polishing compound. I got a whole arsenal of stuff to make sure that this thing shines like a mirror. Something to match the opalescence of Stacey Shea Williams. All right, that's looking pretty well covered. I think we'll probably revolve it around and maybe take a few passes at it just to make sure. And why don't we just go ahead and certainly isn't going to hurt if we have a little bit of thicker coat of epoxy. So let's go ahead and make sure there's another layer all the way around, whether the stuff is covered or not. That'll give us a chance to maybe smooth it out a little bit. All right, yeah, this is going well. Using this stuff is very daunting because, you know, after all, it is just, it's glue. Very potent glue at that. Speaking of, actually have a little bit of a issue with this deal. Address quickly. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but the this is the I've made this little rig for my vise so that there's a way to protect the wood of whatever I'm clamping in the vise. And I was actually suspecting that this may happen when I did this, but epoxy doesn't necessarily adhere well to all plastics. It adheres well to some plastics, but others it just, like this stuff, all these spills and stuff that are going on this lid here will come right off as soon as I Mm. When it dries, and when that dries, it just, I can pluck it right off of this plastic because it doesn't bond to it. So it did not bond to that the plastic of the vice clamp pads. So it came right off. I'm going to have to figure out some other method to stick it there, but in the meantime, it kind of stuck. So we'll go ahead and see if it'll stick there for a little while longer. I think I might have to take some narrow strips of wood or something and screw them into the plastic clamp pads, and then the leather will adhere. The epoxy will glue the leather and wood together just fine. I'll just have to screw the wood in to the plastic jobby. It's just kind of overkill, but whatever. I want to make sure that I don't dig divots into my guitar necks that I am messing around with accidentally with the jaws of this clamp. Boy, this is amazing how, I mean, the glitter is already loud enough as it is, you know. But woo, when you put a clear coat on it, just makes it sparkle. And yeah, the difference between the parts of the sides here that had been covered with epoxy, and every once in a while there'd be a little patch that hadn't got covered. And I mean, it's kind of strange to describe glitter as dull, but compared to all the surrounding glitter, those little patches looked awfully dull. Okay, yeah, we're just going to have that excess glue running down. Oh, that was not a good idea. Here, we'll replace that block. Basically, I just let epoxy dribble all over one of the little silicone blocks that I'm using to hold the guitar body up. And so now that would be a big old, you know, it's going to be, I don't want the epoxy to pool up on that, which would then basically end up being a big pool of epoxy attached to the back of the guitar. Okay, going smoothly, going smoothly. And we got plenty of epoxy left. That's good. I was a little bit worried that we might end up not having enough, but that's not going to be a problem. And even if we did, we could mix up another 2 tablespoons. This is 4 full tablespoons of epoxy. Is what I measured out. With a 2 tablespoon coffee scoop. I tried 1/3 of a cup, and that seemed like an absurdly too much. I would have ended up wasting a bunch of it. This stuff isn't cheap. This it's a full gallon. It's 2 half-gallon jugs of epoxy. I think it cost me $75 or something like that. It was not cheap. But I'll be able to get a lot of clear coats out of it. And especially if I'm just slightly prudent with it. It's a good idea not to be too prudent. Having to mix up another batch of epoxy halfway through doing a job like this is a big pain. And usually end up mixing the second batch, ends up being way too much. So in the end, you end up causing this very problem that you're trying to avoid. Nice. Here's a little dry spot. God, that just pops, makes it just it really makes it pop. It's amazing. All right, we've made it all the way around. Let's go ahead and well, I'm not going to be able to get it thicker on there anyway, because whatever it's liquid as it is, it's just gonna, whatever is excess is just gonna drip off like it's doing right now, which is fine. But let me go ahead and do a slow revolve, and we can make double sure we've got coverage. And if we end up having to do another one of these mixes and pours, that's just fine too. If we need to make it just a little bit thicker or whatever, that's the whole idea. This is what we're teaching ourselves here. All right, looking darn good. All looks like a wet surface. Okay. Bubble. That's cool. Glad I found that and popped it. Yep. I think I've pulled it off. Alrighty. Well, I think that's going to do it for this particular edition of Pottymouth Guitars. I've been Earl Pottymouth Arbuckle, just like always. And as always, I'd like to thank Make Every Media and Michael Furstenfeld, Seth Cleveland, Ross Victor, all the folks who are helping me out doing these crazy little videos. Eventually, we're going to actually show them to people. I don't know how many of these I've made. Still haven't finished one. But, you know, it'll get done eventually. Maybe. But at any rate, this guitar is going to get done, and Stacy Shea Williams is going to be playing it. She's going to love it. I also love to thank Health Alliance for Austrian Musicians, HAM. Visit myham.org, myham, so myham.org, to donate, or if you want to get involved. And also, you can visit the Sims Foundation. They also are kind of a sister organization with HAM, and they help musicians out with mental health and addiction problems. And I would love to say hey to the Prostate Cancer Foundation. Prostate cancer and the folks who are helping folks out with that problem are near and dear to Earl's heart. Thank you all for coming and listening, watching this. Hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. And hope to see you next time. Love y'all.
Well, you're raising the dead or shooting for the stars. Well, you can't go wrong with a Pottymouth guitar.